Have you ever written something down just to get it off your chest, never expecting anyone to read it? Emma did. She slipped a note inside a library book on a rainy afternoon, a message meant for no one, a quiet whisper to her late father. But the next morning, a stranger walked into her cafe, holding the book, and everything she thought she had buried with it. He wasn't just anyone. He was a millionaire. And he was the man who unknowingly destroyed the last piece of her father's legacy. What would you do if the person who hurt you was also the first one to truly see you? Would you close the door or open it again? Just a little. This is a story about grief and grace, about second chances that don't arrive with flowers, but with rosemary and silence. It's about the kind of healing that doesn't shout. It waits. And when the moment comes, it knocks. Once, gently. If you've ever loved, lost, or waited for someone to come back, you might find a piece of yourself here. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel if stories like this speak to your heart. Now, let's begin. The rain had a way of silencing things in Franklin Ridge. A steady drizzle had been falling since just before sundown, turning the town's brick sidewalks slick and the air into something soft, like an old song playing far off. Emma Walker stood behind the counter of her cafe, the hummingbird nest, watching the water trace familiar paths down the front window. It was closing time. The scent of dark roast still lingered in the air, mingling with cinnamon and something older, maybe nostalgia. Emma wiped the counter with the same practiced care she gave everything these days. Her hands, slightly calloused from years of work, moved slowly, methodically, as if hurrying might crack something that hadn't yet healed. She locked the front door and turned off the lights, leaving only the string of warm bulbs above the shelves glowing. It was the kind of quiet she liked, not empty, just peaceful. After slipping on her navy coat and scarf, she grabbed her tote and stepped into the rain. It was just under a mile to the Franklin Ridge Library, and she didn't mind walking. She rarely drove these days, not because of gas or money, but because walking made her feel like she still had somewhere to go, somewhere to be. The library sat on a small hill behind the old Methodist church, its brick exterior damp and darkened from the weather. Inside, the warmth met her like an embrace. It was almost empty at this hour, save for Mr. Green at the front desk and a few regulars reading silently by the windows. Emma moved toward the back, to the fiction section, row 14, where the shelves curved inward like a secret path. She reached for a book she hadn't seen in years, The Winter Guest by Eleanor Hartley. The cover was worn, spine creased, but the title still held the kind of quiet pull that made her fingers pause. It had been her favorite in college, before life became more about bills and less about dreams. She sat in her usual corner chair, tucked beneath the old lamp with the floral shade, and opened the book. The smell of old pages and time filled her lungs like a lullaby. She read for 20 minutes, but the words blurred. Her mind kept drifting back to memories that no longer stung but still left shadows. The sound of laughter with her ex-husband on road trips, her mother's voice on the porch swing, the sound of a door closing that never reopened. And then, without much thinking, she reached into her bag and pulled out the small notepad she always carried. She tore off a piece and wrote, "If you found this, I hope today is kinder to you than yesterday. If it's not, Hold on. Sometimes. Better comes late, but it still comes. She folded the paper gently and slipped it between pages 143 and 144. A moment of something irrational passed through her. She didn't write her name. Didn't want to be found. It wasn't about being seen. It was about not disappearing entirely. She closed the book, returned it to the shelf, and walked out into the night without looking back. The rain had lightened. The town clock struck 9. She walked home slowly, the note forgotten already. But someone else would remember it. Very soon. The morning came gray and hushed, as if the rain had taken something with it when it left. The streets of Franklin Ridge still glistened from the night before. Emma arrived at the café just after 6:30. The same way she had every day for the past 5 years, keys in hand, scarf tucked tight, and a quiet breath before unlocking the door. She turned on the lights, brewed the first pot of house blend, and wiped the pastry case with a soft cloth. The hum of the espresso machine kicked in like an old friend clearing its throat. Outside, the world slowly stretched awake. It was an ordinary morning in every way, until it wasn't. The bell above the cafe door jingled at precisely 7:16 a.m. Emma looked up from the register, expecting to see one of her usuals. Instead, a tall man stepped in, his coat still damp at the shoulders, his eyes scanning the room like he was looking for something specific and hadn't found it yet. He was in his late 40s, maybe, with silver at his temples and a quiet weight in his posture. His clothes were simple, but well-fitted. Nothing flashy. Just intentional, like the kind of man who didn't need to explain who he was. Emma offered a polite smile. "Good morning. What can I get started for you?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. With a gentleness that surprised her, he placed it on the counter and slid it toward her. She looked down and froze. It was the note. Her note. The one she had left in the winter guest at the library just last night. Her heart stumbled. "How?" He finally spoke, voice low, smooth, but carrying something beneath it, something raw. "I found this in a book. Row 14, fiction section, page 143. Emma said nothing, staring at the paper as though it might vanish. Her first instinct was panic. Had she broken some rule? Offended someone? But then he continued. "I wasn't supposed to be there." He said, softer now. "I was driving through town, had a reservation in Knoxville, but I got lost. Or maybe I didn't. I don't know. I pulled over to stretch my legs, saw the library, and walked in." He paused, searching her face. "I didn't know what I was looking for. But when I opened that book, it felt like someone had written exactly what I needed to hear, at the exact moment I needed to hear it." Emma's throat tightened. She wanted to say it was nothing, just a passing thought, but the way he looked at her, it didn't feel like nothing anymore. "Did you write it?" he asked gently. She nodded. Slowly. There was a long silence between them. Outside, the town clock chimed 7:30. He smiled faintly, almost embarrassed. "I'm not here to make this strange. I wanted to say thank you." Emma glanced at the note again. It was still folded the same way she'd left it, creased in the corner where her thumb had held it. "You don't have to thank me," she said quietly. It was just something I do sometimes. For myself, mostly, I think, he said. It was for both of us. He extended his hand. James Whitmore. Her eyes widened slightly, not because the name was familiar, but because of the way he said it, as if it came with a weight he'd carried for too long. Emma Walker. Their hands met, briefly. His grip was warm, steady. I don't usually come to small towns, he said, glancing around the cozy café. I've lived most of my life in glass buildings and airports. But something about this place, it feels like breathing. Emma didn't know how to respond to that, so she did what she always did when words felt too big. Coffee, she offered. On the house. He smiled. That would be nice. She poured him a cup, black, no cream, no sugar. He took it in both hands, like it was something sacred. He sat by the window, said nothing more, stayed for nearly an hour, watching the town slowly unfold outside the glass. Emma worked quietly, her eyes flicking to him now and then. When he left, he nodded at her, tapped the note once on the table beside him, then walked out into the pale morning light. Emma stood still for a long while after the door closed. The bell jingled softly in its wake, and though he hadn't said much, something in her world had shifted like a thread pulled gently loose. She didn't know why. Not yet. But she would. James returned the next morning. Same time. Same quiet air around him. Same corner table by the window. Emma had half expected him not to come back. Maybe he was just a passing moment, like the note itself. But at 7:16 a.m., the bell above the door jingled, and there he was, as if yesterday had simply folded into today without interruption. This time, he didn't speak right away. He just nodded to her, and she nodded back. There was a kind of understanding in it, the unspoken kind. She poured a cup of coffee before he asked Black again. He accepted it with that same steady calm. No small talk. No how are you? Just quiet. At first, she found it odd. But by the end of that week, his presence had become as natural as the smell of coffee beans in the morning. Each day, he came in. Each day, she poured. And each day, they sat across the room from each other in mutual, silent company. The townspeople started to notice. Franklin Ridge was the sort of place where people still read the local paper and knew the names of everyone in the grocery store. Strangers weren't common. Silent ones, even less so. Mrs. Dobbins, the florist down the street, leaned over the counter one afternoon. He's been in every morning this week. That a new friend of yours? Emma. Emma smiled faintly. Just a customer. But even she wasn't sure anymore. James didn't ask questions, didn't push. He didn't try to impress or entertain. And Emma found herself oddly comforted by it. She was used to people trying to fill silence with noise. But James sat in silence, like it was an armchair, something he had spent years learning to be comfortable in. One morning, the rain had returned, tapping soft fingers on the windows. Emma poured his coffee as usual. But this time, she hesitated before walking away. She wiped her hands on her apron, turned slightly, and said, "Most people can't stand the quiet." James looked up, one brow raised. "But you sit in it like you know it well," she continued. He smiled, faint and knowing. "I do." She leaned slightly on the counter. Why he took a sip before answering. Because sometimes the loudest things live in quiet places. She didn't ask him to explain. Didn't need to. That one sentence said more than most people ever did. Later that day, she found herself thinking about it while restocking the tea shelf. That was the thing about James. He didn't speak much, but when he did, it landed. There was a steadiness to him, not polished or rehearsed like so many men she'd known before. There was no mask, no pitch, no performance. One Saturday, nearing the end of his second week in town, he lingered longer than usual. The cafe was mostly empty, just Emma, James, and a young mother with her toddler in the corner. Outside, snow had started to drift in faint, soft flakes. Emma stepped from behind the counter with a new pot and offered to refill his cup. He nodded, and this time, when their eyes met, something paused between them. A recognition not of who they were, but of what they both had lost. He looked at the snow and said, "My wife used to hate snow, said it made the world too quiet." Emma gently poured, saying nothing. "She passed away last winter." He continued, "I haven't been home since." Emma held her breath a moment before sitting in the chair across from him, something she hadn't done before. "I lost my mother on a snow day," she said, surprising even herself. 15 years ago. I still remember the sound of her rocking chair that night. Everything else was silent. James glanced at her, and for a few seconds, the world stopped humming. They sat there, two people stitched together by the smallest of threads. Loss, silence, snow. It wasn't a love story. Not yet. Maybe never. But it was something real. And that, for Emma, was enough. Later that evening, she found herself smiling at the way he folded his napkin before leaving. It was such a small, thoughtful thing. Deliberate, gentle. The bell above the door rang as he stepped out, and the cafe felt a touch colder. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She sat on her porch, wrapped in a blanket, sipping herbal tea and watching the snow collect on the railing. Her thoughts wandered back to the note, to the book, to the man who read it and stayed. She'd spent so long thinking she was invisible, but maybe she wasn't. It was a Thursday morning in mid-December when the wind carried a sharper bite, the kind that made you zip your coat a little higher and tuck your chin a little deeper. Emma had arrived early to bake a fresh batch of cranberry scones, something her mother used to make when the days got short and the sky stayed gray. The cafe smelled like memories. James came in right on time, like always. She had started expecting him now, though she would never admit it out loud. He looked like he hadn't slept, eyes a touch darker beneath the calm. "Rough night?" she asked softly as she poured his coffee. He shrugged. "Dreams. Mostly." She didn't press. Over the past few weeks, they had developed a rhythm, like a song with no lyrics. Just chords played between glances and sips. That morning, he brought a book with him, one from the local library. Emma noticed it because of the stamp on the inside cover. Property of Franklin Ridge Public Library. She smiled. "You're becoming a local." James smirked. "Thought I'd get to know the town's literature before they run me out." She laughed gently, and something about the sound seemed to catch him off guard. He looked at her like he wanted to say something, maybe ask about that laugh, where it came from, but instead, he opened his book and began to read. An hour later, when the cafe quieted, Emma brought over 2 cups of chamomile. "On the house," she said. for sleepless nights? He accepted it with a nod of gratitude. You always read business books, she asked, noticing the hardback cover that read Leadership, Leverage, and Legacy. Old habit, he said. Thought I'd need to stay sharp. She raised a brow. For what? He looked down, tracing the rim of the mug with his thumb. In case I ever went back to who I was? Emma leaned back in her chair, curious now. And who was that? He didn't answer right away. Then, as if pulling the words from somewhere far away, he said, someone who built things and broke them. The tone in his voice shifted, a faint tremor underneath. Emma studied him a moment. Tell me something, she said. Do you remember a real estate project called Hollow Creek Estates? James froze, mug halfway to his lips. That was a long time ago, he said carefully. She nodded. You were part of that. His silence was the answer. Emma's eyes didn't soften. My father was the last to sell, held onto our house until the very end. He had a small printing press, passed down from his grandfather. Said he couldn't put a price on what was built with his hands. James stared at the table. Frank Walker. She blinked. You remember his name? I remember the way he spoke at the town hall. Said not all progress was progress. Emma's breath caught. He lost everything. James swallowed hard. So did I. Eventually, she stood slowly, her hands trembling, and walked back behind the counter. She didn't say another word that morning, just poured coffee for strangers and smiled like nothing had shifted. But something had. James stayed until noon, then left without finishing his second cup. That night, Emma sat on the floor of her living room, the lights off, her arms wrapped around a box of old photographs. Her father's face stared back at her in black and white strong jaw, grease on his shirt, eyes like hers. The printing shop had closed 16 years ago. He died 3 years after that. She'd never fully forgiven the world for taking him. And now, the man who sat in her café every day, the man who looked at her like she mattered, had been part of that taking. She didn't cry. Not right away. She just sat there, quiet, listening to the hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen and the wind pushing against the window panes. Later, she opened the book James had left behind. Inside, a receipt from the Franklin Ridge Library fell into her lap, and scribbled on the back, in a familiar, slanted handwriting I can't rewrite what was, but maybe I can help rebuild what's next. Jake, Thibault. Emma folded the paper in half. She didn't know yet if forgiveness was possible. But she knew this. He hadn't known who she was when he first walked in. And when he found out, he hadn't run. Maybe. That meant something. Maybe not. The next morning, James didn't come. Emma kept glancing at the door between making lattes and wiping down tables. By 7:16 a.m., she'd already brewed a second pot. By 8:00, she had accepted what she didn't want to admit. She told herself it was better this way. Cleaner. Easier. But the ache said otherwise. At 9:12, the bell above the door finally jingled. James stepped in, a little slower than usual, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet plea. Emma didn't greet him. She didn't pour his coffee. He walked to the counter and waited. I didn't know, he said softly. About your father. Emma looked up, her voice calm but cool. And if you had James hesitated, maybe I would have left. Emma nodded. That would have been easier for both of us. Silence stretched between them. I read what you wrote. She continued. The note in the book. The one that said you wanted to rebuild. James's jaw tightened. It wasn't a lie. No, she said. But it's not that simple either. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached under the counter and pulled out a photo her father standing in front of the print shop. Arms crossed. Proud and tired. He worked that press for 40 years, she said. Lost it in 4 months. James stared at the photo like it might burn him. Emma's voice cracked. He died thinking the world didn't care about men like him. And now you walk into my cafe, drink my coffee, read my books, and I don't even know if you remember what you took. James took a step back, like the words had weight. I remember, he said quietly, more than I ever let on. I didn't come here to hide. I came here because I didn't know where else to go. Emma blinked fast. Why here he met her eyes? Because I was tired of running. And because the words in your note made me stop. She swallowed hard. James reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. I didn't plan this, but I need you to have it. Emma hesitated, then took it. Inside was a check not flashy, not performative, just quiet, sincere. Her voice rose, hurt now. You think money fixes this? No, he said quickly. But maybe it starts something, a scholarship, a foundation in your father's name. I don't know. But I had to try. Emma stared at him. I don't want your guilt. I'm not offering guilt, he said. I'm offering the only piece of good I know how to give right now. The words hung there, heavy. She folded the check and placed it in her apron pocket without looking at the amount. I need time, she whispered. James nodded, stepping back again. I'll stop coming, he said. If that's what you need. Emma shook her head. No, just don't come tomorrow. He opened his mouth, closed it, then simply said, okay. And with that, he left. She stood there long after the door closed, heart thudding like something just broke. Because it had. Emma didn't sleep that night. She lay on her side, watching shadows shift on the ceiling as the wind outside nudged the window frame. The envelope James had given her sat untouched on the nightstand. She hadn't looked at the check again. She didn't want to. Not yet. Her chest was full of noise, the kind that didn't speak in words, but in memories. Her father's hands, ink-stained and calloused, his laugh echoing in the kitchen. The way he'd call her kiddo even when she was grown. The sound of the printing press at dawn. She missed him in ways that hurt too much to name. By morning, the sky was flat and white, the kind of winter day where time seemed to pause. Emma made herself coffee, then sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen. She didn't plan to write. Her hand just moved. Dear Dad, I'm angry, not at you, not anymore. Maybe at life. Maybe at people who build empires and forget the ground they build on. Or maybe I'm angry that I let someone close again, and it didn't feel like betrayal until it did. She stopped. Her pen hovered. He didn't know it was you, that you were mine, that I still carry you in everything I do. He walked into my life with eyes that didn't see what he'd broken. And then he saw, and he stayed anyway. She exhaled. I think part of me wanted him to be a villain. Easier that way. Cleaner. But people are messier than that, aren't they? She tore the page out, folded it once, and placed it in the tin box she kept under the sink, the one filled with old postcards and letters she never sent. She walked to the cafe around 10, even though it was her day off. Jessie, her part-time barista, raised an eyebrow. "Thought you were staying home today," Emma shrugged. "Place feels quieter when I'm here." She brewed a fresh pot, cleaned the counters, rearranged the books on the shelf, anything to keep her hands busy. By noon, she found herself at the small park bench behind the cafe, the one where she and James had once talked about silence. The snow had melted there first. The wood was cold, but familiar. She pulled another note from her coat. This one, torn from the back of an order pad. "I didn't know your wife died. I didn't know you were the one behind Hollow Creek until it was too late. But I also didn't know that someone like you would sit for hours without needing to be heard. Or that I'd miss that silence when it was gone." She didn't sign it. Didn't plan to give it to him. Just folded it and placed it under a loose stone by the bench. It was a ritual she'd started as a girl, hiding thoughts in the ground, like seeds. That night, she walked past the library. The lights inside were warm, inviting. She stepped in without thinking and wandered the aisles. Row 14, Fiction. The book was still there, The Winter Guest. Someone had placed a note inside it, not hers. She opened it. "Whoever you are, your words meant more than you'll know. Thank you for writing what I didn't know I needed." Emma smiled. Her throat tightened. Maybe kindness had a way of echoing, even when the voice that started it had gone quiet. When she stepped outside again, the wind had shifted. Softer now. She didn't know if James would ever return to her cafe. She didn't know what she'd say if he did. But for the first time in a long while, she felt still, not whole, but healing. 3 days passed. No text, no message, no familiar jingle of the door. Then on a quiet Sunday afternoon, the cafe bell rang. Emma looked up from the register, heart pausing mid-beat. James stood there, not at his usual table, not even near the counter, just inside the door, holding something in both hands, a potted rosemary plant. He didn't speak, just waited. She blinked, unsure whether to move or to breathe. Finally, she stepped out from behind the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. "I wasn't sure if I should come," he said softly. "I walked past here yesterday. Twice." Emma looked at the rosemary. "That for me?" He nodded. "You said once that your mother loved herbs." I remembered. She hesitated, then took the pot gently from his hands. "Thank you." A moment passed, long enough to remember everything and forget none of it. "I'm not here to ask for anything." James continued. "Not forgiveness, not coffee. I just wanted you to know. I meant it. Every word I said." Emma looked at him, really looked at the tired lines near his eyes, the way his shoulders held something heavy, but not bitter. "You've changed," she said, not accusing, just noticing. James gave a faint smile. "Grief will do that. So will regret." She nodded. He stepped back toward the door. "I'm heading upstate next week. A friend's working on a community housing project. Thought I'd help if they'll let me." Emma raised an eyebrow. "That's a bit of a pivot from luxury developments. Maybe I finally figured out that progress should start where people are, not where profit is." She couldn't help the smile that tugged at the edge of her mouth. He paused at the door. "I'm not trying to fix the past, Emma. I just don't want to waste the rest of my time pretending it didn't happen." She stepped closer, her voice low. I'm still angry sometimes. I know. And confused. He nodded. And maybe not as indifferent as I wanted to be. That made him stop. You said you wouldn't ask for anything, she added. But if you're leaving, I'd like to give you something too. She went behind the counter, opened the old ledger drawer, and pulled out a small envelope worn, creased, tucked carefully in a ribbon. She placed it in his hand. What is it, he asked. A letter I wrote and never sent. To my dad. I don't know why I want you to have it. Maybe because I see parts of him in you. The good ones. James stared at it like it weighed more than it should. She looked down. Or maybe because I need someone to carry a piece of him forward, and you're the only one who's ever stood still long enough to listen. James pressed the envelope to his chest. I'll take care of it. The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was warm, rooted, like earth finally ready for planting. As he stepped out into the cold, Emma stood at the door a moment longer, the scent of rosemary still clinging to her hands. A week after James left, the town felt quieter, but not emptier. The café kept its rhythm, the usual hum of espresso and conversation. Customers came and went. Jessie complained about the weather. Life moved, but Emma noticed the silence where James used to sit. Sometimes she'd glance at the table by the window and expect to see a book left open, a rosemary leaf tucked into a napkin, or just the weight of someone listening. Instead, there was space. That Saturday morning, Emma opened the cafe early. She wanted to bake Need the morning into something solid. As she mixed a new batch of lemon poppy seed muffins, her phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. He gave me your letter. I read it 3 times. It made me call my daughter after almost a year of silence. Thank you for reminding me what matters. Marion, volunteer at Hollow Oak Housing Project. Emma stared at the screen. Her heart stumbled. She hadn't expected him to share the letter, and she hadn't expected it to reach someone else. She reread the message, slowly, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. Later that day, the mail arrived. Among the bills and flyers, one small envelope stood out, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a photograph. James, standing next to an older woman in front of a half-renovated house. They were both holding hammers, mid-laugh. Behind them, a wooden sign read, Rebuild with Heart. On the back of the photo, scribbled in simple black ink, Tell Frank he's part of this too. J.W. Emma pressed the photo to her chest. That night, she walked back to the bench behind the cafe. Snow had returned, soft and steady. She cleared the seat with her gloves and sat down, pulling her scarf closer. She didn't bring a letter this time. Only silence. Only memory. But somehow, that felt enough. In the days that followed, more messages trickled in people who had found Emma's old note in library books, passed from hand to hand, shelf to shelf. One woman said it helped her leave a toxic marriage. A teenager wrote that it made him cancel the plan he'd made to disappear. A man sent a drawing of a hummingbird and signed it simply. For the nest you built, Emma had never intended to be heard. She'd written to release, not to reach. But maybe that was why it worked, because healing, like coffee and kindness, didn't need to be loud, just warm, just steady. She hung the photograph of James and Marion behind the counter, near the shelf of books. Customers began to ask. She began to tell, bit by bit. The story unfolded through flour-dusted hands, and mugs filled halfway, and glances that didn't rush, and in that slow unraveling, something mended. Not fully, but honestly. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the first green buds began to appear on the trees lining Main Street. Spring had not arrived in full, but it had whispered its intention. Emma was sweeping the front steps of the café when she heard footsteps behind her. Slow, deliberate. She turned. James stood at the edge of the sidewalk, his hands in his coat pockets. No rosemary, no envelope, just him. They looked at each other like the last page of a book that had taken too long to read. "I was just passing through," he said, voice rougher than she remembered. "Didn't want to leave town without seeing you." Emma set the broom aside. "Didn't think you were coming back." She replied. "I didn't either," he admitted. "But then again, most of my life has been full of things I didn't expect." They stood there in the soft afternoon light, the kind that made every shadow seem less sharp. "I got your photo," she said. "And your letter," he answered, gently. A pause. Emma looked down, then back up. "You didn't have to share it with anyone." "I know," James said. "But it didn't belong just to you, or just to your dad. It belonged to anyone trying to find their way back." She nodded slowly. They stepped inside the café without deciding to. It just happened. Like old rhythm finding its beat again. He took his old seat by the window. She poured him coffee without asking. For a while, they didn't speak. Just watched the world move beyond the glass. Finally, Emma said, "Do you still think about it? Hollow Creek?" Everything it cost James looked out, then met her eyes. "Every day. But now, not as a failure, as a turning point." She tilted her head. "What turned? I stopped trying to build things taller than the people I ignored," he said, and started asking what it would look like to build something that could hold a life. A real one. She smiled quietly. "Sounds like something my dad would have said." James nodded. "Sounds like something you live." That made her still. He took a breath. "Emma, I don't know what you see when you look at me. Maybe just a man who caused too much harm. Maybe something softer. Maybe both." She didn't answer. "But if there's a version of this of us that exists beyond what was broken, I'd like to find it. Slowly, carefully. Not to replace what was lost, just to honor what still matters." Emma looked at him for a long time. Then she reached into the drawer beneath the register and pulled out something wrapped in linen. A coffee mug. The one he used every morning when he first arrived. The one with the tiny chip on the handle. She set it in front of him. "I never threw it out," she said. "Didn't know why." James wrapped his hands around it. Maybe because it still held something worth keeping. Neither of them smiled. But neither of them looked away. Weeks passed. James didn't move back to town. He didn't ask Emma to visit. There were no grand gestures, no declarations, no dramatic scenes. But once a week, always on Wednesdays, a package would arrive at the cafe. Sometimes a book, sometimes a photo from a build site, sometimes just a handwritten note with a quote from one of the novels they used to discuss. Emma didn't always reply, but she always read them, always smiled when she saw his handwriting. The cafe settled back into its rhythm. Emma hosted poetry nights again. Jessie painted a mural on the back wall, an open book with birds flying out. Customers donated volumes for the reading shelf. The space became what Emma had always dreamed it could be: a refuge, a beginning. One Friday morning, as the sun filtered through the windows and cast soft gold over the counter, Emma stood, holding the rosemary plant James had given her. It had grown. She repotted it in a larger container and placed it by the front window. Beside it, she tucked a new note, not meant for James, not for her father, just for whoever needed it next. Sometimes, healing doesn't come from fixing the past. It comes from planting something new in its place. That afternoon, she walked past the library again. She didn't stop, didn't need to. The stories were already growing elsewhere. At the edge of town, a new development had broken ground. Not condos, not high-rises, but low-income homes built with recycled wood and donated time. Emma had driven by one evening, unseen. James was there, sleeves rolled up, laughing with a group of volunteers, paint on his shoes. She didn't get out of the car, didn't need to. Some beginnings didn't require arrival, just presence. That Sunday, a woman named Marion stopped by the café. They sat at the window and talked for over an hour about daughters, second chances, and the quiet strength it took to stay when it was easier to leave. When Marion left, she said something Emma would hold on to for a long time. "He talks about you like someone who gave him back his name." That night, Emma wrote one last letter. "James, I used to think broken things couldn't be useful, that once something cracked, it became a cautionary tale. But maybe that's not true. Maybe cracks are just how the light gets in. And maybe what we started through mistakes and silence and stubbornness wasn't wrong, just real. I'm not offering promises, but if you're still sending books, I'll keep reading. If you're still planting rosemary, I'll keep watering. And if you find your way back to my door again, no explanation, no reason, just know, I'll open it, not because of the past, but because of the middle we found our way into." Emma. She didn't mail it, just slipped it into the pocket of her coat. In case. Sometimes, the most important letters we write are the ones we never meant to send. Emma's story reminds us that healing doesn't always come with closure. It often begins with honesty. A few quiet words, scribbled in the margins of our lives, can travel farther than we ever imagine. As we grow older, we carry more memories. Some we revisit with warmth, others with weight. But this story teaches us that even pain, when shared with gentleness, can become a bridge, a quiet conversation, a reason to try again. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's recognizing that people change. And sometimes we do too. So maybe, like Emma, we don't need to fix the past to move forward. Maybe we just need to plant something new in its place, a kind word, a small gesture, a door left slightly open. And maybe, just maybe, someone will walk through it not to make things perfect, but to make them real. Thank you for spending this time with us. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of someone or somewhere you've been, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that heal, inspire, and connect us all one heart at a time. Until next time, take care of yourself and each other